This is Build Where You Are, an educational podcast series that is for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. Build Where You Are brings you the raw and uncut journeys of entrepreneurs across a range of industries. From food and beverage to apparel and business services, tune in to Season 1 to hear how 10 entrepreneurs built their businesses from the ground up. Welcome to another episode of Build Where You Are, an ESO Ventures podcast. I'm your host, Ahanotu Ahmad. As I always say, you can call me Tunde. I'm super excited for our next guest. I met Onye at one of the ESO mixers that we had. And when I heard about his venture into palm wine and what he was doing there, I was like, okay, this is interesting. Because I've only had palm wine actually in West Africa, in Ghana. Yeah, we didn't get the chance to actually have that full conversation, so I'm happy we're having it now. So turn it over to you to kind of kick us off and just introduce yourself.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on here. My name is Onye Ahanotu. I am the founder and winemaker at Ikenga Wines. And at Ikenga Wines, I'm focused on elevating and really introducing palm wine to the Western market. It's been around for millions of years before when the dinosaurs were around, palm wine is around. But the basics is it's the biggest wine you've never heard of, from Central America to Southeast Asia. It's enjoyed and has been enjoyed for a long time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So background, you're Nigerian, and I'm assuming this is something that you've had through family connections at family functions and things, or what was your I guess introduction to palm wine that made you say like, nah, more people need to be trying this?
Yeah, I think that's I can give you the short answer or the long answer. Maybe let's
go somewhere in between.
Yeah. My introduction to palm wine was through, I think initially like Nigerian literature. Things Fall Apart. Many people have read that book.
Right.
But that was kind of really the first time I heard like the cultural context.
Gotcha.
Being Nigerian American, I did know kind of ethereally of the use in like wedding ceremonies, specifically in like the southeast of Nigeria, and kind of the cultural relevance. But because of the finickiness of palm wine, I never had it here in the U.S. I never saw it here in the U.S. So kind of one of the things that I got into this to do was to bring it here and kind of figure out like the unlock, like why isn't it here? Why isn't it bottled?
Got it.
And selfishly kind of like to pair with the types of foods that I really like to eat, you know?
That's right.
I throw it down in the kitchen, so it's kind of, yeah.
Got you. So what was your first time actually trying it?
It was not so long ago. It was 2017.
Okay.
I was in Nigeria for kind of the holiday season, festive period. And at that point, I kind of already had this curiosity about palm wine, and it was kind of me throwing myself into the kind of category and just seeing how do people consume it, what's good palm wine, and what's maybe not so good palm wine.
Got it. Okay. So you have the exposure through literature and books. You have the, familial context. You get out there, you try it, and then where does the switch turn on where you're like, maybe this is something I should actually like pursue as a business venture?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I guess it kind of gets into this framing of how I've like started to think about my career in general, which is starting to focus on things that kind of like only I can bring into the world. And with palm wine, with the shelf stability issue, it typically only lasts 1 to 2 days. I kind of saw that as an opportunity to bring my scientific background and thinking into it of I've studied everything from nanotechnology to applied physics. There's some tool that we can do to, get this in a bottle.
Yeah.
Kind of the deeper I dove into that, the more I realized maybe, I have to be the one to bring this into the world. Because it doesn't seem like anyone else is close.
So then your background, now I'm curious, because 2017, well, we're almost in 2020. Yeah, so 7 years ago is when you actually tried it for the first time. But your background is in what, like from your working perspective? What were you doing prior to, or what do you simultaneously do right now?
Yeah, I describe it as I'm like classically trained in science and engineering.
Okay.
I studied material science engineering and chemical engineering, kind of in general, but have kind of applied those ways of thinking to many different fields, from electronic, like organic photovoltaics to biofuels. So that was kind of like what I was doing previous to focusing on Ikenga wines full time.
Got it.
And yeah, I definitely, you could see the through line into kind of my approach to the wine, I think.
Right. Yeah, I was curious. I was like, okay, nanotechnology, applied physics. This is a wide range of things that could, have some skill set that could lend itself to this.
Yeah, okay. But the way that I kind of like think about the superstructure of like what I do is like trying to understand the interconnectedness of things. What are the important variables? How does that end up kind of like manifesting itself in like this multi-scalar kind of like phenomenon of like for palm wine, let's say, how do we understand like the environment and how that impacts like the quality, like the ecology of the place? How does that impact the quality of the wine? How do the microbes themselves, kind of like impact the quality or like your perception of it? And then ultimately like, what tastes good and bad, like a subjective way of thinking about it. So yeah, trying to squash all these things in this like complex interconnected system and like starting to bring like some through lines and kind of like, oh, I tug on this and it kind of pulls on this other thing.
Got it.
Kind of way.
So now you've been making palm wine, you've had, samples, you've had folks trying it. And so I'm just curious to hear, where you are in the process. You're like, okay, cool. I have to be the person. I have the, academic side of understanding how to bring this. I have the cultural relevance, and I have this desire to do this. And so what were the steps that you took from a more like tangible standpoint to say, all right, we need to get this in front of folks to try and start testing this market and see what this is about? Yeah.
It's been a journey. As you're saying, it started, 2017. It was many years ago, right? And it'll get to kind of like the key innovation that I had along this journey. But basically 2017 was me going back to Nigeria, starting to understand how they make the wine traditionally, conventionally, and then starting to figure out how can we preserve it. Just preserve what they make, put it in a bottle, allow it to be shelf stable, long enough for me to like bring it to the U.S. and serve the U.S. market. That was the initial kind of idea. I brought some materials with me that first trip. I kind of got it to be, shelf stable for maybe about a month. I did some tastings in Nigeria with just some of my family of like, hey, what do you think of this? Does this kind of still taste like what you know palm wine to be?
Gotcha.
And then I realized a lot of the tools that I needed to progress, I couldn't really source them in Nigeria effectively. So came back to the US, where I could leverage my privilege of having access to like a bunch of different industries and like spaces that just aren't in Nigeria.
Yeah.
And part of that was me coming to Oakland, finding the DIY kind of biology community. These are like people who aren't like in academia, they're not in an institution, but they kind of like create like a bio lab for themselves.
Okay.
For the community. So think of like a community center. You get a membership, you can get access. But yeah, finding that space here in Oakland, which felt, very Oakland, and it lowered the barriers for me to kind of like get into a space and start doing the R&D of understanding the chemistry and biology of palm wine.
I want to, this is like a slight tangent, but it's related to what you just said. As it relates to doing business, and you can speak specifically to Nigeria, I do business in Ghana, but understanding logistics out there and also the limitations of access to certain things that you may need. I can speak for myself and say it's not for the faint of heart. But also, I can also speak and say like the folks who are committed to doing this, kudos to you, because it is, trust, there's always an easier way to do it that is not involved here, but part of it is like, but there's this cultural relevance, there's this connection, this is home, all of these things. And so I just wanted to hear you speak a little bit to some of those difficulties that folks may not understand and that folks may take for granted, like the access, like you said, and privilege that you have being in the U.S. and all of these resources that are available. Yeah,
definitely. That could be its own podcast.
We may have to run it back.
I would say, maybe to continue this through line that I brought up earlier, and then we'll get to that. So in this development process, kind of once I got to the lab space here in Oakland, and I really started to get some insights of what makes palm wine tick, I realized that we didn't need to make it with the palm tree.
Oh.
So there's this big like aha moment of like, oh, this is like the key innovation, and this would allow this category to scale without destroying the environment.
Interesting.
And that would have been really difficult to kind of come to in Nigeria with the access to the tools that I had. Then kind of like going back to think of like production in the US or production in Nigeria, there's different kind of like risks. With the production in the US, this is like the way I'm doing it now is more of like a tech, kind of like approach, trying to balance the nature and the tech. But there's technology risk kind of there. Yeah. In Nigeria, I could, do the way they've been doing it for, hundreds of years. Yeah. Just get it in a bottle, get it stable, but there's business risk. And that's kind of like what you're getting to of like, the complexity, let's say, of operating in these countries. And when I was walking through that business risk, it was like, okay, I need to set up a production facility, get things in there. Yeah. But that's not enough. I have to have like my own security, because then somebody might try to come in and take what we have. I have to provide my own power, my own everything, kind of thing. So it was a completely different set of things. And even when it comes to export, right? I didn't get there, but I know the complexities of getting things in and out of the ports.
And Nigeria specifically, it's not as simple as DHL customs clearance.
No. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I'm sure people who are, listening to this, if they've been or know of these countries, done business there or have family there, they know what we're talking about. Right. It's a deeper conversation, but it's just something that's makes operating international business in these countries just so much more complex.
Right.
I mean, it's kudos to you for doing it, but for this kind of category, I didn't want to start there with the high business risk. I wanted to start with like my core competency was the technology, and then I also saw like a bigger potential for this kind of like technological approach to making it of like leapfrogging the way the West does things.
Right. I mean, and that makes a lot of sense. You said if you know, you know. And so I can't let this slip. You said making palm wine without the actual palm tree. I'm curious to hear more about how that works. And you kind of alluded to that it may be better for the environment as well?
Yes. Yeah. So a lot of people in the West know when they hear palm, they think like, oh, the orangutans and like environmental destruction. For many palm plantations that are out there, especially in like Southeast Asia, there's been a lot of like clear cutting of like rainforest and then just popping up a palm plantation.
Got it.
And it's like it's a monocrop. It's just like, as far as the eye can see, is palm.
Got it.
So that's kind of the destructive side of palm plantations. And if I wanted to scale this in Nigeria, it's kind of hard to get away from doing something like that. Maybe it's not as bad. It's still not good.
Right.
Making palm wine without the palm tree, the way that I do it is I make a molecular palm sap. So conventionally, palm wine is made from the sap of palm trees.
Right.
So instead of relying on the tree to make it, I find other plant-based sources for all the molecules that make up palm sap. And then I kind of make my own palm sap and have full control over the quality. When I make it, I don't have to worry about harvest windows or anything like that, but can focus on the art and the craft of the fermentation and the winemaking kind of aspect of making wine.
Interesting.
rather than the agricultural, like, oh, we didn't get enough rain. How is that going to impact our,
For sure. And then step upon step. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, we got to do water collection and drip irrigate. All of the different things that you said are very dependent on, this rain, or was there a bushfire that wiped out 25% of my acreage, or was there?
Or, we're talking about challenges of operating in these areas of like, did somebody sneak onto the plantation and like take it for themselves?
Right. Also, true, they tap into the trees. So, okay. So that is so interesting. So you're able to do this in the Bay Area using similar saps, and then from a taste perspective, though, with folks, well, I guess most folks actually wouldn't know what palm wine tastes like. I mean, a small portion of the population wouldn't know. But I guess for you, how is it? Yeah, it's similar in taste or the same in taste? I mean, I've had a range of palm wines, so. Yeah.
You've probably had good ones. You've had bad ones.
Yeah. Depending on how long they've been fermented and right.
Maybe some that smell like rotten eggs or something.
It's a range. I'm like, for people who, and I'll take a stab at this after you, but for folks who don't know, how would you describe palm wine as a taste? And then B, I'm curious from ABV and alcohol percentages. What is like the percentage you're going for with yours?
Yeah. So I'll take a stab at talking about my approach or my thoughts on palm wine and kind of like my view of it. And then we'll kind of get into the taste and maybe how my approach to the flavor as well. But yeah, with palm wine, it is a spontaneous wine, a natural wine. That's like it's a new phrase now in the grape wine world, but it's a natural wine. So there is no control when it comes to the microbes that are doing the fermentation or to the winemaking process itself. It's just like sap comes out the tree, you collect it, boom, you have palm wine within a couple hours. And from that, you get a lot of variability, but then you also do get a lot of off flavors. You get a lot of this like just really complex flavor that's in there. And what I'm trying to do with my wines is kind of explore the potential of these wines. And some of that is removing some of those flavors and letting some just shine, like highlighting some. So trying to bring some control, trying to bring like some intentionality when it comes to palm wine.
Got it.
So when it comes to the flavor, conventional, which is what I call the traditional palm wine you get in Nigeria or Philippines or wherever, that I describe it as like, it typically is like pretty sweet, like almost like overpoweringly sweet for me. Of like for when people think of like wines here, like in the West, it would be like off the charts in sweetness. And it's sometimes balanced with like this acidity, like, it's a light acidity. And it can get stronger as it ages. Right. But it's pretty light beverage. Fruity floral is kind of like one of the most general ways that I describe it. I'm curious, how you would.
It's like, to me, it's like tangy a bit. It's like, so it's definitely sweet, but it has this like sour, and I guess what you were calling acidity, sour tanginess to it, where after you drink some, you do have the, cheeks sunk in, like, type of flavor to it. And like you said, sometimes that can be stronger, but I can't really compare it to other drinks. It's kind of like, now grapefruit is too bitter. I'm trying to think, like, if you could think of a grapefruit that's not bitter, and make that like alcohol, that's like the closest kind of comparison that I can put. But the other thing though that I'll say is, compared to, like wines that are, traditional, whatever, red wines, white wines, I feel like palm wine is actually more refreshing. So, other wines is like, okay, you drink a little bit. And one of the dangers, I guess, of it being so refreshing is like when I'm in Ghana and stuff, and I'm like, I'll get some palm wine. And I'm like, you'll end up drinking more of it than you think, because like you kind of feel like hydrated more so by it than like a super dry red wine or like, kind of like the syrupy sweet Moscatos or anything like that. It's a bit more like, okay, I can tell this is like, there's something about this that just makes me like,
super easy to drink, super refreshing. And as long as the sweetness isn't too much for you, then you can just like, you're just drinking it like water, right? So,
honestly.
I think, one kind of descriptor that I like to give to people to differentiate between grape wine and palm wine is that it doesn't have any tannins. So tannins are that like kind of mouth drying, kind of like that thing that makes you slow down when you're drinking grape wine.
Yeah.
So that's like a key difference there. I think there's lots of opportunity because palm wine has been like, it's just however it is. Like there hasn't been any intentionality. There's lots of opportunity to explore kind of the nuance of it and even elevate it beyond what it is right now. So one example is the first wines that we're going to be focusing on are sparkling palm wines. So, almost think of like the champagne of palm wine, right? It sometimes does have that a little bubble or two, but it's not like effervescent. Yeah. So I really want to lean into that and give something, produce a wine that touches on some of these flavor notes that I really appreciate about the wines, like when I do go to Nigeria and try some, but also kind of like make it like fit into the Western wine world in a way. Not make it fit, but kind of like find this balance. It's like I'm here in America, I'm trying to make this Nigerian wine. It's like it's a bridge, right? So eventually I'd love to work with folks in Nigeria and across other parts of the world, introduce that business complexity at some point. But kind of have their version, coming over as well to kind of like balance it out.
I'm personally, I can just say I'm excited to try some, especially sparkling, because I've definitely never had sparkling palm wine. Like you said, I've had some that there's some little bit of bubble carbonation in there just from however the process is, but that's cool.
Yeah, and then what if there was like a dry, like for me, I'm not going to go to a sweet wine for like every day, like if I'm here consuming. But I would be more likely to go for a drier, palm wine. So with my approach to it, we do have that ability to like make a, zero residual sugar, completely dry, no sweetness palm wine. And what does that taste like? And then there's another question, what does that taste like after a year or two, which is, now you're getting the aging palm wine. That's a whole different dimension of product.
Interesting.
So that's kind of how I basically want to use technology to enable new experiences without harming the environment. And this is kind of like an interesting way where like you get more levers, you get more control, you get better quality is what I call it. And you're not reducing like, you're not, cutting down the rainforest, let's say.
So right now, where are you in these processes? I mean, obviously you're perfecting these things, you're getting the right notes, you're introducing, you said these elements that you talked about, dryness, sparkling, shelf life, all of these. But I'm curious, I know you've had like some tastings, but what's the current state of things in the process? Yeah,
it's been several years of doing the R&D and kind of like trying to become a winemaker, which is very different from the science of wine. Like, technically I know this is wine. I'm making it taste good. I've tasted with a range of audiences, people who have had palm wine before and have loved it, grew up on it, to those who've never heard of palm wine. And now I feel like I have a good handle on what we want to launch with, which will be good representation. The past year has kind of been getting that confirmation with people of like, this tastes good, what setting would you want it to be in? And then how does that age? How does that flavor change over time? So I want something that, at least for a year or two, it's real-time aging. So it's like a year or two, you kind of get like the direction of how things are going to, eventually evolve for this wine. Now we moved away from the R&D phase, which was kind of earlier in the year, to the tasting phase, which has been a little bit more recent, to getting some funds, getting some capital to move forward with production. So at this point, looking forward to finding a nice little production space, and trying to evaluate whether we do that in our own or whether we partner with an existing producer. This kind of like goes back to my maybe more analytical, business strategy kind of like background of like, okay, there's pros and cons, like how will this decision shape the trajectory of our business?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big decisions for sure. I mean, right, when it comes to the partnerships and versus, controlling full production on your own, it's like, okay, cool, I will have ownership of this process. However, if I'm newer to this, am I better suited to partner with someone who has, all this experience, and maybe I don't have to do the trial and error and get the expertise that they may already have with the experience that they do have. So
yeah, and part of that is putting on my like more traditional like startup, Silicon Valley tech hat. It's like the growth. Like, let's say this does take off. How after a year. We have to get licenses for each location we're in. That takes 4 to 6 months or so.
Right.
So like if in a year now we've kind of like outgrown that partnership, like we're kind of restrained and limited on that growth. And since we're doing a new category for the whole Western world basically, and there's some international interest as well, it's like maybe we do want to have that potential, but then there's risk and cost that comes with that potential. But yeah, I think that's something that's been good to be in the ESO community and to be able to connect with some other folks who are, sharing spaces and kind of getting their perspectives on it. Like, what is it like? What are the pros and cons from them? And just kind of like, learning from others who are, in the similar or just the next step above me,
I'm curious also from a financing perspective, is this something that you've just kind of been doing self-funded? Is it something that you are like, well, a lot of these things, it's just sweat equity because you have, some expertise to do a lot of these processes on your own? I'm just...
Yeah,
right.
yeah. I describe it as pretty scrappy.
It's reality. It's reality.
Yeah, it's definitely real. And yeah, a lot of this happened during the pandemic too. So the R&D, like the initial R&D, like, the invention, this is possible. We can make palm wine without the palm tree. That happened just before the pandemic.
Okay.
And my idea was that was all bootstrapped, just kind of like my savings. And yeah, I do have the background, so I don't have to like contract out this work. Okay. I had access to a low-cost lab, and I was just like, okay, I could do this myself at this stage. And then after kind of the initial invention, started the business legally with the idea like, okay, we're going to raise some money, and then we're going to hit the ground running. We're going to get a space. We're going to figure it out as we go. Yeah. Pandemic hit, so it was like a big like, okay, well, let's reevaluate. Let's still try to push things forward. Yeah. And that ended up looking like me focusing on the product and really trying to hone in on like a product that tastes good. So, maybe it worked out, in the end. Like maybe it still took me a while to figure that out. So if I had the money early on, maybe it would have been a little too early. Right. But yeah, friends and family have supported me kind of in that early stage. And yeah, more recently, I did another round, which was more friends and family and some angel investors, and ESO also was able to support me on that with the experimental program, which I'm super excited that you guys were open-minded and willing to try something different.
Yeah, I mean, it's real though. Like we think traditionally about who gets access to funding, and then is this also the structure of SBA loans or just the ways, or community lenders and those things. It's like
I went through during those like few years, so I kind of tried this angle, tried that angle. Oh, maybe SBA, like, I'm not going to qualify for an SBA loan. Okay, great. Like maybe this approach, no, like VCs, not really like their space, at least at this stage, not really what they're looking at. So yeah, I think it's kind of, that's why I say scrappy, because at this point it's just like, okay, we gotta get to this goal, and who's like in line to support us in achieving that, and also has a little bit of patience as we're focused on quality. So how can we balance that, like focusing on quality and like also growing at the same time? So
that's real.
We need some patient money, basically.
And I mean, like you said, the patience of process. You're dealing with fermentation. dealing with alcohol and aging and how those things actually play into the the overall industry also. It's like for investors and folks who are buying in.
Yeah.
It is like that perspective of like, this isn't as simple as, even like for me in like clothing manufacturing, it's just like, we get it, it's here, it's quality school, we sell it, and it's not, we have to get the license and go through the ABC, and go through all these committees and all of those things. I would assume that that's a whole nother layer of like licensing and paperwork because it's alcohol and FDA and all of these things as well.
Yeah, there's definitely that extra. It's like business, everything you get in business, some product business, physical product business, plus, regulatory kind of things. Ultimately, something that I have thought about a lot is like I'm, introducing this wine, palm wine, to the U.S., and I feel like some level of responsibility, like, well, one, it should taste good, it should be representative, but still like expressive of myself. So yeah, I think ultimately it has to taste good. That's kind of like one of my bottom lines of, and that takes time. And you can't, I don't want to rush that process. You end up with just like a flash in the pan or like a fad, which is, I want something that has some staying power.
Yeah. Going for longevity. That's cool.
So yeah, similar to the fashion, there is like this qualia element of like, you just have to go there sometimes and like feel the material and be like, yes, this is what we want.
Yeah, that's very, very real.
Yeah.
And so, in the current moment, I'm just curious if folks, do you have any like events or tastings or things that are public, or is it more like friends and family, private, if folks want to, try it, or is it telling folks, look, you can follow me on my socials and stay tuned for when? Yeah.
It's somewhere in between. You could definitely follow on the socials. Instagram kind of feels like home these days, so at Ikenga Wines, #ad. But yeah, we also do have like a mailing list. If you go to our website, ikengawines.com, we'll pop up, subscribe. And we have been putting out like private invites out there. So right now it's kind of more on like the, if you know, little like private, like, tasting experiences.
Cool.
And yeah, I think in 2024, we're going to start like scaling some of that up.
Got it.
So we're kind of in build mode at the moment. So it's kind of like maybe no more tastings for the next like 3 months or so while we just focus on, the business side of things and getting some foundations.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so, switching gears just a bit, but still related to entrepreneurship, for folks who are interested in launching their own business, not necessarily specifically in, wine and beverage industry, but just generally speaking, what is a piece of advice that you would give folks? Like when you were, first venturing into entrepreneurship, what is something you wish somebody else had told you when you were taking that first step towards this?
I think folks did tell me. I think it's still like good advice, and but it's like focus on your why, maybe. Like, why do you want to do this business? Why does it mean anything to you? Because it's not going to be an easy process. And at some point you do kind of have to have something more than money, like that's propelling you forward to keep doing it, because it's not, there's so many other things you could do for money.
True. Very, very, very true. And that's similarly something that I've heard, and that even like within ESO, we try and get folks to understand, and especially with something like you're saying, that entrepreneurship is a long journey, even for the monetary return. Sometimes that return may not come until, 5 years, 10 years, like however long it may be. And so you have to be passionate about what it is. Otherwise you may lose steam. So it's interesting.
So yeah, I'm sure there's many other, things, but I think like if you're just starting out, if you're just like, you have an idea and you're like trying to evaluate, is this a good idea? Like, there's the business, the market kind of stuff, but then also like introspect and kind of like try to understand something of like how does it connect with you, and to give the art of war kind of like reference, it's like, know yourself and you'll win every battle basically. If you know yourself and your enemy, which is maybe in this case, like your customer is not your enemy, but like who's on the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's real. And then any just parting ways, more general advice or wisdom that you'd like to impart on anybody who is watching this?
Good question. I mean, so much. If you give me a little bit more specificity, direction of like, where do you find people typically need the most help?
Yeah, I think, kind of something that I speak to a lot of folks about is in this era of social media that we're in, a lot of folks are reeled in by the entrepreneur influencers who really try and make things seem far more easy or straightforward or clear cut.
Glamorous.
Right, and glamorous than entrepreneurship ever is. And anybody who has been on this podcast, this podcast, or anybody who I know who has their own business, is like, this is not like how it goes. The goal is to get there for sure, but especially in those early years, it's a grind. And so I guess the question that I'm more so asking is, as we've shared all this wisdom and have really given a realistic understanding of your specific industry. But yeah, if there was anything like that added layer of just letting folks know, like, I know there's somebody who is paying for a bunch of ads to put this in front of you to try and sell you this course.
Yeah.
But the reality of entrepreneurship is...
Yeah, I mean, I guess the alternative to those folks is like, I'm always skeptical of those folks. I'm like, what have you actually been successful at doing or building? And sometimes it's building that platform of talking about how to be successful.
Yep.
But yeah, go out and talk to people who are actually doing things. Other small business owners or medium, whatever size business you may want to grow to, and just kind of like learn more about their journey. And I think this gets to maybe like something I used to mention, like, when I was more heavily in the lab side of things and like working with like mentoring folks in the lab. But my saying was a day in the library can save a week or two in the lab. And I think that's true, for business as well, of like sometimes just like, carving out some time, even though you feel like, oh, I need to do this, I need to do that, like carving out some time for like, strategy, think time. Sometimes it's structured, sometimes it's unstructured. But carving out that time can really save you in the long run of, that's kind of like my general view on things.
That's real. I've never heard that phrase, and that is something that indirectly I've kind of realized that, even speaking from a personal perspective, I need to do more. A lot of times it's like, I'm on a long drive and I'm inadvertently having these thoughts, or I come across, something sparks a thought in your mind. You're like, oh, how can I apply this here? And it's like, a lot of times we don't give ourselves that structured, or like you said, structured or unstructured, but set aside time to, how do I think about strategy? How do I think about new developments, and how might that expedite something? Because as an entrepreneur, there's always something to do.
There's always something pulling your attention. And
there's always,
maybe another like tidbit is like, you'll never be caught up. So there's always something. And if you do want to create some time or create some space for important things, or to even like start to align, like what are the important and urgent things that I need to focus on, like you do need to kind of like be like, okay, well, I might not get to this week, maybe not even next week, but like, we'll just keep it on the list. And at some point, maybe I'll hire somebody and they can do it for me. If it's not important, it's not urgent, know? There's different types of frameworks to try to prioritize your activities. And the one that I'm referencing now is called the Eisenhower framework, which is like a little 2x2 grid of like being able to prioritize, like, what are the things you should be focusing on right now. There's plenty of those types of things, and sometimes the influencer types will drop those, but I feel like oftentimes just watch like a YouTube video of like a college like lecture or something, like an MBA lecture, and you'll probably get more out of that.
That's real.
But
that's real.
Depending on what stage you're at, I guess.
Right.
But just get out there, do things. That's kind of like the biggest thing. Keep doing things, even if you come up on some roadblocks. It's just kind of like building the resilience. And perseverance of you're going to have to overcome obstacles, and it's kind of like a muscle that you have to build. Maybe in like these little failures, these little no's that you're taking, and just like, okay, just keep going, just keep going.
A strong muscle that you have to build.
Yeah, lifelong. I don't
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Onye, I appreciate you for coming by today, for sharing these insights, for being real about the process, and for speaking to an industry that we really haven't heard much about on the show thus far. And so, yeah, I just think the combination of, like you said, your why, the cultural and historical relevance to you as an individual, mixed with this really wide-ranging opportunity to bring something that is consumed, so widely in other areas to this new market, is great. It's great to hear about, and I'm excited for all the things that are to come. To be clear, so everybody knows, you can find Onye. Ikenga is spelled Ikenga Wines.
Yes.
So it's at Ikenga Wines on Instagram, and it's ikengawines.com online.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah. And yeah, you can pre-order now if you want to kind of get in line, and if you're really excited about trying something new and something to go with your jollof rice or your South Indian food. But yeah, it's been wonderful to be here, and yeah, just kind of chat through the process, and it's an ongoing process.
Ongoing. That's the other side of entrepreneurship. It never stops.
Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, glad to be here.
Thank you.